Victor slammed the pen onto the polished table and the microphones picked up the single, hard sound. Cameras swung toward the seal of the acquisition, and someone in the press gallery laughed into a phone. Guilt rose in Victor like a pressure behind his ribs.
The evidence timeline.
He felt it before he named it, and it pushed him to scan the document even as the handshake took place.
Everything.
The cameras left. The applause cooled. The problem was clear within minutes. A clause buried in the printed pages could permit immediate layoffs and the transfer of Claire Monroe's team's intellectual property. That clause made the victory expensive, and Victor's first move was a mechanical reflex to protect the company, and to hide what he knew it would cost him personally. He moved through the room with the same controlled rhythm he used in every negotiation. His shoulders stayed square. He kept his jaw slack and his voice steady. He listened as lawyers thanked each other and as public relations started arranging staged smiles. Inside, guilt tugged at his hands when he thought of the names on Claire's payroll. Guilt shifted to defensiveness when Ethan Shaw, the board director, intercepted him in the marble corridor and asked about optics. Victor answered without softening, "Ethan Victor," placing his palm flat on the stone wall between them. "We'll honor the assurances we discussed. You promised a minimal restructuring, Victor." The numbers Don T matched the press release. Ethan, tapping a tablet, eyes narrow. Victor kept his voice even. "We will protect the core team." The exchange lasted 5 sentences. Victor felt his face tighten, and he steepled his fingers without meaning to. He heard Claire's name in Ethan's next sentence, and felt the conversation pivot from corporate accounting to responsibility. That was the first emotional shift. Guilt to guarded control. Claire stood at the edge of the negotiation table when he turned back into the glass room. Her cream blazer caught the rim light. She held a folded page in one hand and a small pendant in the other. When she spoke, her words were low but hard. "Victor, there's a red, lined clause in the signed copy. Claire, it transfers our patents and allows immediate terminations. Did you approve this?" Victor's mouth thinned. He watched the way her fingers found the thin gold pendant at her throat. A brief, anxious motion he had seen earlier in the meeting. Her eyes were green, and they were fixed on his face. He had kept his distance in public. Now, with fewer cameras, she closed that distance with questions. "Maya and I discussed contingencies. Victor," meaning Maya Patel, his general counsel. "I didn't see that language in the final packet. Then whose pen added it after the red lines?" Claire. Her tone moved the second emotion shift, from guarded control to blunt accusation. Victor felt a heat in his neck. He cut the conversation with a single professional move. "Let's go to the conference room." They moved as staff cleared cables and photographers folded tripods. Anna Ruiz Claire's coup slid into Victor's temporary office and put the red, lined page on the polished table. The ink on the margin was not Claire's. It came from a printer with a different margin setting. The legal team leaned in. Maya Patel stood with a tablet in her hand and began to outline potential legal exposure. This clause was inserted in the final assembly, Maya, tapping the red line. "If enacted as written, it allows immediate transfer and economically justified terminations." Claire spoke to Victor, naming facts, not feelings. "I told you the team can be scattered. We designed these products together." Victor watched her mouth form the words and felt the responsibility again as a physical pressure. He heard Anna say, "We found this after the signing." Ethan returned to the glass conference room, eyes narrowed at the tablet screen. The boardroom conversation became a quick, tight exchange of 3 lines per speaker. Who would own IP? Who would keep staff? Who would take the reputational hit? Victor kept using short declarative sentences. He gave orders. He listened. He refused to let his throat betray him. When the board member delivered the blunt warning about legacy, Victor heard his own motives named aloud. "Langford, your record stands on performance. If the market sees payroll swell, your margin suffers. Your legacy is cost control." The line landed like a weight on the table. Victor felt his face go still. He thought about the reports that had followed his name for years and about the firm hand he kept on quarterly numbers. He had built a reputation by reducing noise and trimming costs. Now that reputation asked for another round of trimming. Victor paced the small conference room with his hand against his briefcase. He focused on the physical details, the fold of his suit's sleeve against his wristwatch, the cold of the glass in the chair back. He felt the guilt again, this time sharpened into a decision node. He could accept the clause and promise to minimize layoffs later, or he could refuse and risk the board's ire. The guilt shifted. Defensiveness moved toward calculation. Maya, what are our legal levers? Victor. Maya tapped an index finger against the tablet and named 3 options. She spoke with the precision of someone who wrote contracts for a living. The options were narrow and messy. One would require immediate concession to Claire. Another would delay public disclosure and open the company to accusations. The third would attempt to renegotiate language post-acquisition, a slow attrition Victor knew the market would punish. Victor listened and kept his hands flat on the table. He did not want to call Claire greedy. He did not want to admit fear. He for time and for a closed-door conversation with Claire. Outside the boardroom, the hallway smelled of coffee and the solvent, clean tang of floor polish. Claire waited with Anna. When Victor stepped into the corridor, Claire addressed the issue of retained staff with a single, clear demand. Victor, I want written guarantees for every team lead for 90 days at full salary. Claire, I want a clause that keeps our product roadmap intact for 12 months. Victor felt the sound of a meeting ending in his chest. He used a short sentence, I will get you guarantees in writing. Her eyes tightened. Names, Victor. I need names. He hesitated. He could feel the second emotion shift in that pause. Calculation to avoidance. He answered by naming a plan instead of names. We'll draft the guarantees by morning. Claire gave him a look that read as both challenge and exhaustion. Anna stood behind her, silent, notebook under her arm. Anna's face said she had stayed up nights redlining contracts and now she wanted action, not promises. Back in his glass office, Victor closed the door and let the city light fall across the desk. He held a cufflink between thumb and forefinger and felt its cool weight. He reviewed the timeline of the day's edits on his tablet. A last-minute assembly, a courier, a minor administrative change that could have folded in a clause if a template carried over. He tapped the screen until lines of email opened up. Every message felt like a small evidence trail. An hour later, Claire returned with Anna and Maya. The closed-door conversation began like a negotiation and became an accusation within minutes. Claire read passages aloud with a steady voice. Article 6, subsection B, she said, placing the legal page on Victor's desk. This allows immediate transfer of our patents to Langford Holdings. Victor's voice remained low and measured. We will not strip your team overnight, he said. He meant it, and he knew the corporate ladder above him wanted margins, not sentiment. He laid out the legal options. He promised to remove the dangerous language if his legal team could show that it had been inserted without approval. Claire's hands moved again toward her pendant when she grew uncertain. Victor, we built a lab. We hired people based on promises. If those promises evaporate, people lose homes. Victor noticed the tremor in her voice and fought to keep his own hands steady. He spoke in short sentences and named specific actions. I will approve a hold on any terminations for 90 days. We'll create a joint oversight committee for the product roadmap. I will instruct her to freeze any layoffs, pending committee review. Anna interjected. Claire should be on that committee. Ethan's voice rose later when he returned to press for a concession. Langford, the board expects you to control costs. How deep will you go? 3 rapid exchanges followed. Victor answered, each line clipped. We will audit redundancies. We will reassign cross-functional roles before we consider layoffs. We will present a cost plan in 72 hours. The exchange met the instruction. 3 to 6 fast back, and 4th lines that tightened the argument and forced a decision. At the peak of the confrontation, Victor's mask slipped. He ran a thumb over the thin scar above his right eyebrow and felt a memory. A childhood afternoon on a construction site, where a bent nail had taught him to keep both hands steady. He did not voice the memory. He used it as a physical anchor. His measured baritone hardened into a plea that was still corporate in form. Claire, he said, tell me the names you want guaranteed. "I'll sign the hold now." She listed 3 names and a team lead. Her voice hardly varied, each syllable a punctuation. Victor wrote the names down. He signed a non-disclosure memorandum and initialed pages where Maya indicated. The boardroom felt smaller after those initials. The legal team exhaled. When Claire left, she placed the small pendant on the negotiation folder. It was an act that would register later as deliberate. Victor watched her fingers set the pendant beside the signed papers. He heard Anna speak in the hallway about next steps. Ethan had already calculated the market response. Victor felt the emotional shift tighten into a new pattern. From defensive calculation to the raw strain of personal cost. He stayed at his office window after the staff dispersed. Below, the city moved in clear lanes of traffic and lit windows. He held a cufflink and turned it over between his fingers. He thought of legacy and of what he would appear to have done when analysts wrote their morning headlines. He also thought of the 3 names Claire had listed. He had pushed for performance at every turn. Now he had made a public promise that would cost him his margin if he honored it. The guilt reasserted itself, but it had narrowed into a concrete problem: how to keep the team and keep the board's confidence. A message lit his phone screen from Ethan. "Board wants numbers." Now he closed his eyes for a breath, felt the tightness at the base of his throat, and called Maya. They spoke in short, procedural sentences about reworking projections and presenting alternative synergies to the board. Maya suggested pausing any termination language and drafting public messaging that emphasized continuity rather than consolidation. Victor agreed. He moved to undo a misstep and to contain damage. He typed an instruction to her with a single-sentence directive. Pause all termination processes related to the acquisition until joint committee review is complete. He hit send. The action was small but decisive. It eased the guilt slightly because it had tangible effect. That tactical move was a third emotional shift, from paralysis to small, decisive action. Outside his office, Anna came back to ask for details on the committee. Claire was already gone. Anna 2 practical questions and then added, "Victor." She put the pendant there on purpose. Victor looked at the negotiation folder. The pendant sat next to the signed paper like a punctuation mark. He picked it up and turned it in his hand. The pendant was warm from Claire's skin. He knew she left it as a trace she could reclaim later. He could return it, or he could call it evidence of a promise made. He called Anna into his office. List the deliverables for the committee by morning. Include payroll heads and product milestones. He kept his sentences lean. Anna nodded and left with a crisp, efficient movement. By night, Victor stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office with the cufflink in his palm. He watched lights blink in neighboring towers and felt the building's SAVAC cycle against the glass. He could assemble numbers that satisfied the board. He could draft legal maneuvers to remove the clause. He could also betray a promise. He thought about how often he had chosen the company over individuals. He thought about Claire's steady voice and the way she wore exhaustion in the faint crease between her brows. He made one more concrete move before the chapter closed. He set the cufflink on the negotiation folder and dialed the head of HAR. "Freeze any termination related to the acquisition," he said. "I want written confirmation in 30 minutes." When he replaced the phone, there was a soft tap at the outer office door. He opened it and Anna stood there with a small stack of papers and a pen. She looked at Victor and said, "We have the committee charter. Claire suggested 3 names and I added 2 alternates." Victor answered with 1 sentence. "We present it to the board tomorrow and we hold to the guarantees." He signaled for her to enter, and she set the papers on his desk. The folder held a pendant and a cufflink, 2 small objects that had started their own negotiation. Claire's pendant rested under his thumb when he slid the papers toward him. He felt the metal's edge and thought of the people those names represented. He did not yet know if his choice would satisfy the board. He did not know whether the clause would resurface in some other document. He knew only that tonight he had chosen a concrete action over argument. He picked up the phone again to confirm the HAR freeze and typed an email to Maya with 1 line. "Protect the team. Defend the promises." The chapter closes on Victor returning the pendant to its place on the negotiation folder and tapping a sent email that instructed her to freeze terminations. The last sound is the quiet click of a sent message and the distant hum of the building as he turned off his office light, leaving the cufflink on the table and the pendant beside the signed papers. Claire stepped out of the boardroom carrying a small cardboard box, and someone in the startup kitchen shouted, "They recutting rolls at first light." Betrayal tightened the muscles along her throat before she named it. She stared at the box lid, at the paper clips and the coffee mug with the company logo, and let the word braid into every movement. The press vans idling beyond the lobby glass had already begun to hum with distant generators, and Claire felt the hum press through the soles of her shoes. She moved through a cluster of employees who gathered like a loose net in the dim kitchen, shoulders hunched, eyes searching for her face. Evelyn Park reached for the box as Claire passed. "Take it, Claire." Evelyn, voice steady. "Let me." Evelyn's hand closed over Claire's fingers, and the clamp of that grip gave Claire a steadying jolt. Claire did not hand the box over. She kept hold of it as though the contents were a proof she still existed. The first 5 sentences carried the immediate problem. The acquisition closed, reorganizations loom, and Claire must protect the team and the values she built. That concrete set of stakes governed her next steps. Dinah Legal will send the notices at 5 a.m. Anna Soto leaning in with her tablet flashing a trending post. "There's a memo out already. It's framing us as sellouts." Claire heard the claim and felt the first emotion shift, defiance replacing raw betrayal. She straightened. She read the headline on Anna's tablet, an accusation framed as betrayal, and she registered it as both danger and the instrument she could use. "Show me, Claire." They moved into a cramped corridor that smelled of dishwasher soap and burnt coffee. Dinah from HAR had her mouth pinched tense. "I've spoken to legal. We can try to slow this into a phased process, but Marcus says the clause is non-negotiable in the initial draft." Claire's jaw tightened. She had spent 10 years drafting a culture into being. She had not built a parole into a press release. She pushed past the impulse to speak in slogans and instead asked, "Marcus, what clause are we looking at?" Marcus Reed walked into the alcove, tablet in hand, expression flat. "The buyout guarantees headcount on paper but removes decision authority. They set up a subsidiary to centralize operations." His voice had the measured legal cadence that Victor often used when he wanted to close down dissent. Claire felt the second emotion shift, defiance giving way to calculation. She moved her fingers over the pendant at her throat without breaking eye contact with Marcus. "So they keep bodies and strip our team of power, Claire. That won't protect anyone if it erases how we worked." She watched Marcus scroll, watched numbers and line items appear like an accountant-esque scaffolding. "Can we preserve autonomy anywhere in the paperwork?" she asked. Marcus named the terms and the places where autonomy could be negotiated. "There is a subsidiary clause," he said. "It's buried. It can preserve certain teams under their operational charter if exercised within 48 hours and approved at executive sign-off." That answer pressed the next external event forward, an actual lever that could be pulled. Claire felt hope tighten into strategy. The third emotion shift appeared, calculation, urgent resolve. Evelyn stepped closer. "If we litigate, we risk severance offers and a public fight that will hemorrhage trust," she said. "If we push for the clause, we preserve roles and operations, but it will require Victor's explicit concession." Claire looked up through the glassed hallway and saw Victor's silhouette on the other side, framed by navy suit and the cold light of a corridor where his presence made silence. The image concretized the conflict. Keep the company whole or fight the new owner. Claire intercepted Victor before he crossed into the public lobby. He leaned against the navy glass and nodded once, a small, efficient movement that carried authority. Claire held the cardboard box like an anchor. "Victor," she said, voice low enough to keep the cameras from the exchange, "this clause exists that can preserve our teams. Will you authorize it?" He blinked once, the single steady blink she remembered from earlier press photos. "Marcus already briefed you. Victor, the clause reduces integration flexibility. It imposes costs that the board does not want. His tone was measured, cool. It was the same tone that had sealed the deal in the glass room where a pen had been slammed onto the table the night before. Claire remembered that hard sound, how the microphones had picked up the strike, and the way Victor's jaw had not moved afterward. Victor, if you sign this, people keep their projects, their reporting lines, and their paychecks. If you refuse, you can claim victory and public praise, but people lose livelihoods tomorrow. Claire kept her sentences short. Each short sentence was a tool as much as a plea. Which do you want? She asked. He named the corporate position first. I want stability across the portfolio, he said. I want a clean integration that prevents hostile moves against other assets. He looked at her and, in the elevator light, for the first time in public, his composure cracked into a private admission. I pushed the deal to head off another takeover. That takeover would have lost jobs at scale if someone else had won. I did what I thought minimized overall damage. The service elevator door closed halfway behind them, and the words landed between them like a proposition and a confession. Claire's mouth went dry. She had expected arguments about synergies and leverage. She had not expected a confession about calculation and sacrifice. Her next action was immediate. She stepped into the narrow service elevator with him. People outside the elevator continued to move. Somebody laughed on a phone. The enclosed space amplified the sound of their breathing. You call that minimizing damage? She asked. Victor did not speak for a long beat. Then he said, I called it choosing the least catastrophic path. His hands steepled automatically. I didn't want the other suitor to take control. They'd liquidate this operation entirely. Claire thought of the team sleeping at desks on product launches, of Evelyn running scalpels through budget lines to keep payroll intact. The weight of practical choices pressed on her. You made a decision that affects people's lives without asking them. Claire. The sentence fragmented into an accusation and a demand. Victor, you could have come to the team. You could have told us the danger. She kept her voice low. She did not want the cameras catching anger for spectacle. Her eyes found his face, square jaw, the thin scar above the right eyebrow, and she saw a brittle quality there she had not seen in his public persona. Victor inhaled. I didn't have that latitude. I had to move fast. He looked past her toward the service doors. I also had to protect my own liability. The board would have fired me for indecision while the other suitor made offers. I bought stability in the way I know how to buy it. His words were precise. They offered an explanation without softening the outcome. A phone vibrated loudly in the corridor, and Anna swore under her breath. The interruption pulled the scene back into the building's small mechanics. Messages, leaks, a trending post climbing. External events had to appear every few paragraphs, and here the leak demanded action. Claire's phone buzzed with a forwarded memo. She read the leaked line. Integration plan to centralize decision-making, 0% tolerance for legacy autonomy. The concrete wording changed the stakes from vague fear to imminent procedural inertia. Claire walked out of the elevator first. Marcus, show me the clause again, she said. They moved back into Claire's office, where a desk lamp cast a small pool of amber light over a stack of contracts. Evelyn and Dinah followed. The employees had gathered in the atrium, faces like stones in the half-light. Claire placed the cardboard box on her desk and opened it. The mug and a set of pens looked suddenly trivial. Her hands moved through the objects as she asked practical questions about timelines and signatures. Evelyn pointed to a line in the subsidiary paragraph and said, if we can demonstrate operational continuity and file notice within 48 hours, the clause triggers a protective charter. Claire read the sentence aloud. Operational continuity requires a dedicated reporting chain and documented independent governance. She looked at Marcus. Do we have the documentation? Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, not all of it. We have product roadmaps, some governance notes, but we need formalized reporting lines and a cover memo from you approving the charter. Claire felt the mechanics of the fix. Paper, signatures, verified reporting, stack against the soft fact of people who would show up to work in the morning. She felt a tidal pressure. Either she fought this now or she surrendered the culture she had built. I'll do it, Claire. The fourth emotion shift arrived, resolve hardening into tactical leadership. She outlined deliverables in short sentences. Evelyn, get me the team leads. Dinah, prepare the confirmations. Marcus, draft the notice. Anna, hold off on public comments until we file. I will go to the atrium in 15 minutes. Each instruction moved them from reaction to offense. At the atrium, press vans idled beyond plate glass, and their headlights made lines on the marble floor. People drifted between potted plants and benches, their breathing visible in muffled chatter. Employees clustered in small groups. Claire walked straight into the center and set the cardboard box on a low table as a physical hinge between what had been and what might remain. She spoke directly to the gathered employees. Listen to me, Claire, we have one path to keep our teams intact. We need to file an operational continuity charter within 48 hours, but I need Victor's sign off. I am asking him to honor that clause. Her voice cut the space. Heads turned to the glass where Victor stood flanked by legal. He stepped forward. Outside the atrium, the world felt noisy and public. Inside the atrium, the encounter became a private demand made in public. Marcus, Victor, Claire is requesting executive sign off on subsection 7 that preserves reporting autonomy. Victor's posture did not change. Marcus, we cannot set a precedent of carve-outs inside acquisitions. It weakens integration. The exchange accelerated into a confrontation. Corporate principle versus concrete human consequences. Claire answered him plainly, you can have your integration, Victor, but you can have it on the backs of my team. Her words were not theatrical. They were a set of legal and moral facts. Sign the clause and preserve the charter. Refuse it and accept the consequences of layoffs that could have been prevented. She named the choice he had to make. Victor looked at the faces in the atrium. He looked at Evelyn's lined jaw and at a young engineer who had been leading a product sprint for months. He did not blink into melodrama. He measured outcomes. If I sign this, the board will see it as an unnecessary concession. It will constrain our long-term options. If I refuse, we retain integration freedom, but we discard those constraints. There was a pause that functioned as a decision hinge. Marcus spoke quickly now. Victor, if we proceed without the clause, the operational costs of turnover will exceed short-term gains. Integration will slow. The market will notice disruption. You may buy control, but at the price of execution risk. His legal cadence sharpened into argument. For the first time, he sounded like someone who saw the acquisition as a project to be shepherded rather than a victory to be paraded. Evelyn added, Victor, preserving the teams keeps revenue streams intact. We can maintain brand value and client relationships if reporting stays stable. Her voice carried the practical authority of someone who had run operations through layoffs and still kept product lines alive. Claire watched Victor's face, saw micro-expressions, the small hitch at the corner of his mouth, the tightening at the jaw, that showed internal negotiation where words did not. This was the confrontation the chapter needed. A clash in the atrium where public victory would be weighed against private consequences. Victor's answer surprised them. He stepped forward and removed his cufflinks, a brief, disarming gesture that made everyone inhale. He held the cufflink in his palm and said, if this clause preserves more livelihoods than it sacrifices, I will authorize it. His voice was quiet but firm. The clause, he implied, must have specific measurable protections and a timeline for oversight. He set conditions rather than flat agreement. Claire felt a sudden, small relief that was not victory. She needed to know the precise terms. Name them, she said. State them here. We will draft them and have Marcus file the notice tonight. We will show operational continuity within 48 hours. She spoke with the clarity of someone on a deadline. They moved immediately to Claire's office to draft precise wording. Anna pulled up product roadmaps while Evelyn gathered team leads on video. Dinah collected personnel confirmations and Marcus corrected legal phrasing in real time. The scene accelerated. Action, reaction, drafting, signatures. A mid-chapter mini cliffhanger arrived when an internal message flagged on Marcus' tablet. The leaked memo had a line referencing an alternate buyer who would absorb the staff into a minimal skeleton, an outcome worse than Claire had imagined. The leak forced a sharper negotiation and catalyzed the team to work faster. Claire dictated bullet points and checked names. She for a list of team leads who could testify to operational continuity and a timeline for handover documents. Send me a 1-page summary of operations by unit in the next 4 hours, she said. If we meet the standard, we submit the notice and the clause triggers. If we miss it, we fail on process. Her speech was businesslike. It carried emotional weight via the actions she demanded. The employees outside tracked the progress on their phones. The atrium became a living ticker of hope and anxiety. Marcus drafted the notice with legal phrasing that balanced carve-out protections with oversight. He proposed a 90-day review period and independent oversight by Evelyn's office. Claire read the sentence aloud. Operational charter preserved with oversight and quarterly reporting. She Marcus to add explicit language that would prevent unilateral dissolution of the preserved units without mutual sign-off. He typed, paused, and then added it. The addition made the clause enforceable in a way that could matter in court and in practice. Victor watched the edits. He interjected one condition. Financial thresholds tied to performance metrics that would allow review if revenues dropped below a defined level. That's reasonable, Evelyn. Because it gives accountability. Claire did not like the idea of metrics that could be used later to erode autonomy, but she accepted oversight that had transparent standards. She Marcus to include a clause requiring cross-party mediation before any unilateral change, and he added the line, nodding. At dawn, the press vans outside grew impatient. Someone shouted that cameras wanted statements. Claire refused to provide a sound bite. Instead, she asked Evelyn to call a quick town hall and tell the staff the steps they had taken. Evelyn stood in the atrium and spoke into a smartphone camera with focused brevity. We have an executed notice for the operational continuity charter. We will file within the required period. Management will post details to the team this afternoon. The crowd broke into low conversation. There was no cheer, but there was an audible easing of tension. Victor excused himself and walked toward the glass doors. He paused, turned, and for a moment his expression was unreadable. He to Claire, you did what you had to do for your people. I did what I thought would minimize damage across the board. Claire met his gaze. You mean you did it to head off a worse takeover? Who was the other suitor? She asked. Victor's mouth thinned. For a second, he seemed to weigh whether to answer. Then he named a rival firm and a name of an executive who had been circling them. The revelation reframed the earlier events. Victor had been working a defensive chess game. This twist changed Claire's understanding of his motive from personal ambition to constrained triage. It was a plot twist that shifted culpability without excusing consequences. Claire's final action in the chapter was procedural and precise. She signed the internal notice, initialed every page Marcus produced, and placed the signed document into the envelope Marcus prepared for filing. She handed the envelope to Dina with instructions to register it immediately with legal. Then she returned to the atrium, looked at her people, and said a short sentence. We file tonight. We keep showing up tomorrow. It was a pragmatic close that rested on actions rather than speeches. Outside, Victor walked to his car and sat behind the wheel. He did not start the engine. He watched the dawn pale over the skyline and drew his hand across the thin scar above his eyebrow, a small human gesture. He had won the acquisition, but the choice he had made in the atrium had a price. A concession that would limit his long-term freedom but could save jobs. Claire watched him from the atrium entrance as she guided employees toward the back stairwell and into a temporary war room for the night. Someone called Victor's name from the lobby, but he did not turn. The chapter closes on concrete action. Dinah lifted the envelope with the signed notice and took it to the legal desk to be filed. Victor slid his cufflink into his palm and closed his car door. Claire led the first team meeting of contingency plans under a lamp on her desk. There was no sweeping reflection about destiny, only the clause on paper, signatures drying, and the practical set of tasks that would determine whether the preservation held. The immediate mini-conflict had resolved. Claire secured the mechanism that could protect her team, and Victor made a costly concession that shifted the power dynamic between them. The next steps remained procedural and urgent, and the echo of the handshake and the slammed pen from the previous night still hummed through the building, shaping every next decision. Victor bent and lifted a thin gold pendant and a polished cufflink from the negotiation folder. Suspicion tightened his jaw the instant his fingers touched metal. He felt the sensation as a demand, not a thought. The pendant was Claire Monroe's. He had seen it on her collar at the signing, and the cufflink was one of his. Both resting side by side like a staged photograph. Cameras had left hours earlier. The acquisition handshake had closed the deal, and now an object on a table forced an argument into the room again. He did not stand in the doorway to wait. He carried the items under the rim light toward the glass where Marta and Dana were already arguing in low voices. Victor still had ink under his fingernails from the pen he slammed a few days before. The memory of that hard sound in the press gallery sat in his throat. He moved with a measured, economical pace that masked how quickly his mind was sorting possibilities. Suspicion pushed him forward. It shaped the questions he asked before he spoke. Dana locked the room, Victor laying the pendant and cufflink on the table so they could not be moved. His baritone was steady. Dana did not hesitate. Locked. Dana replied, I closed the corridor cameras at 21:53, but someone opened the negotiation door at 22:04. The entry badge log looks clean. Victor looked at Marta. Any press still in the building? Not in the building, sir. One freelance photographer left at 23 o'clock. Marta answered, fingers tapping a tablet, but someone emailed us a screen of supposed backstage footage. Anonymous. There was a tautness in the room that had nothing to do with the lighting. Victor kept his eyes on the pendant as if it might change meaning if he blinked. The central problem was visible now. Something had been manufactured to suggest intimacy and therefore impropriety. If the board heard a rumor that the chief negotiators staged a rendezvous, the merger would fracture. That clear, concrete threat moved his decisions. A cleaner had found the items. Marco, facilities supervisor, had said so in a breathless voice over the phone. That detail mattered. Marco walked the floors at night. He noticed small things like the creak in the east door or a stain on the conference chair. If Marco reported this, the timeline would be precise. Victor for the cleaner's account and watched as Marta pulled up the building log. Claire arrived on the corridor a few minutes later, her blazer pulled tight, a pale silk scarf tucked into her hand like a talisman. She did not enter the room at once. Victor saw the way her fingers found her pendant and then left it alone, as if she fought a reflex to cover it. He recognized the gesture from earlier sessions when she tightened her grip on dignity rather than give voice to the fatigue behind it. Claire, Victor. He did not offer the pendant. He wanted to watch how she would respond before he supplied evidence. She stepped in under the rim light, and the room drew a line between them. Claire's face was a careful mask. Her green eyes were round and quick. Victor, she said, what happened? Someone left your pendant and my cufflink on the negotiation folder. Victor answered. Marco found them. Claire's fingers went to the pendant. She did not pick it up. Marco. He found them where exactly? On the central table, next to the folder with our signatures. Marta thinks it's a staged image. Dana thinks it's sabotage. I want to know which of them is right. There was an emotional shift visible in Claire in a single breath. From guarded composure to the tightness at the crease between her brows. We don't stage things, Victor. I wouldn't allow. Victor cut her off with a small, exacting question. Who would benefit from making it look like we were colluding? Claire did not answer immediately. She looked at the pendant on the table, then at the cufflink, then at him. That hesitation carried meaning. Suspicion moved to doubt in her face. Where suspicion sat in Victor like a logic problem, in Claire it became a personal injury, an affront to the trust she had tried to hold across the room. Marta interrupted to show a single frame on her tablet. The negotiation table, a reflection in the navy glass wall. The image was grainy. A hand, a sleeve in cream, moved into frame. The photograph could be read in two ways. It might be an erased private moment. It might be proof of a staged scene. The ambiguity became a pressure point. The team split tasks. Dana and Sam went to pull building surveillance. Amir, Claire's legal counsel, texted through the chain asking for access logs and internal messages. Jules and 2 engineers began contacting the payroll and badge systems. Victor moved through these decisions with the discipline he used in negotiation. Clear assignments, prioritized responses. Claire took the pendant and held it between thumb and forefinger, inspecting the clasp and the small engraving on the back. She named the people who had been with her in the boardroom that day. She listed times. Her voice was clipped but factual. I was in my office until the press arrived. Amir and Jules left after the queue and Marco cleans at 23. I don't understand how an external event forced the next pivot. Sam's hand hovered above the monitor in the security room and then jabbed a key. There is a 7-minute gap on camera 5. Sam. His voice was flat with irritation from 20:02:04 to 20:02:11. That's when the table is empty in the frame. Then suddenly the pendant and cufflink appear. Victor's suspicion narrowed into a working theory and then into anger. He Dana to preserve logs and to not let anyone into footage until legal and it could make copies. Amir, I need a forensic snapshot of that subnet now, he said. Marta, prep a holding statement if this leaks. Claire, stay here. Claire's mouth moved. I am not hiding, Victor. I need to protect my team. We cannot spin for the board. We hold our people. Evelyn, a board member who had stayed late, appeared in the doorway like a formal note. She did not wait for invitation. Victor, you read the CO. I want a statement saying this is a misunderstanding. We cannot have this narrative run without us responding. Victor measured Evelyn with a slow blink. He had a different pressure. The deal he had just closed carried weight for his legacy and for a workforce whose jobs depended on the merger. Evelyn, I will control the message. But I want to manufacture a false apology on behalf of Claire's company. Not without proof. Evelyn's voice sharpened. We need optics fixed, Victor. If the market smells scandal, the merger stalls. Victor felt anger shift to calculation. He turned to Claire. Do you trust me to handle this without making you look acquiescent? Claire's reply was 2 words, I trust you. The room leaned into a different tension, alliance. That alignment was brief. Amir walked in carrying a printout, his face white. The anonymous email came from inside our subnet, he said. The cement header traces to an internal terminal on the 3rd floor tenant line. It rerouted through a throwaway account. Whoever did this has access to office infrastructure. There was a new emotion. Alarm. Victor's mind scanned for gainers. Who benefited from burning Claire's reputation and stopping the integration. Amir named names and roles. Board members with residual stakes. A senior engineer who had quietly been put on notice last month. A procurement lead whose budget would be cut. Each possibility pulled suspicion in a different direction. They went to the security control room. The bank of monitors glimmered like a small city. Sam rewound footage with a focused motion that made Claire flinch when the image showed the reflection of 2 faces in the glass. They watched the blurred figure again and again. Each time the image added noise without clarity. Pause. Dana, pointing, look at the reflection on the navy glass. There's a camera angle showing the corridor. That reflection catches something else. 2 shadows approaching from the elevator bank. Victor leaned forward. He felt a shift inside him from suspicion to urgency. If someone had entered from the corridor rather than as an insider with keys. The list of suspects widened. He Sam to enhance the frame. Sam worked with calm concentration and a quiet string of technical commands. The enhancement revealed a hand sliding the pendant across the folder. The hand wore no ring. The sleeve was cream, not navy. The cufflink snapped into place beside it. The detail was small, but it changed their interpretation. The image suggested the scene had been arranged by someone who could approach the table and leave without direct access logs showing a badge. That meant an insider with a clean badge or an accomplice who wore a compromised ID. Victor's voice was low. This is deliberate. Someone wants us to look compromised. Claire's eyes flicked to him. Who wants what? They did not have an answer. Instead they had a boardroom demand. Evelyn pressed for a statement again. Marta insisted the press liaison would leak if there was no response. Victor felt the weight of his responsibilities split. Preserve the deal and protect Clara's company. He made a choice that looked like compromise and acted like protection. He for a temporary internal announcement limited to staff. Tell employees there was an incident involving left items in the negotiation room and that we are investigating. Reassure their roles are secure pending the review, he said. Do not mention names. Do not give the press anything. Claire's hands clenched at the edges of her notebook. I want to let them sell my people out for a statement, she said. Not to save a timeline, Victor heard defiance, then a hard pivot. From doubt to resolve. He walked to the glass where the city glittered and rested his palm on the cold pane. He looked at Claire through the reflection and then into her face. Then we fight it clean. We find who planted this without spinning narratives. That night shifted into interrogation. Victor and Dana called in the engineering leads. Jules and Amir laid out the internal access lists. They cross-checked badge logs, VMAN entries, and a list of who had physical keys. Each cross-check was an event that narrowed suspects. Jules discovered an anomaly in the third-floor terminal that matched Amir's earlier trail. A session had been routed through an admin console for a short burst at 20:04, who had admin privileges on that terminal. Victor, Evelyn's executive assistant and procurement's database admin share an account, Jules, but the access session originated from the adjacently rented suite. Another shift. Suspicion moved toward someone with motive inside the company leadership. Victor rehearsed questions in his head as the room filled with concrete lists and timestamps. He preferred facts to speculation. He preferred to force confession through evidence rather than accusation. Then the chapter's cliffhanger. An unmarked envelope slid under Claire's office door with a single printed photograph inside, showing the pendant and cufflink from a different angle. This one included a reflection that caught a familiar profile at the far end of the table. The photograph had been taken from behind the glass in the press gallery. Marta saw she had not printed it. Claire held the photograph like a challenge. Who printed this? She demanded. No one answered at once. Victor felt a cold tightening as the list of possibilities condensed, a board insider or a journalist acting on a tip from inside. He chose to keep his voice controlled. We treat this like evidence. Amir, preserve the envelope. Dana, chain of custody. Sam, compare the photo to camera angles. Jules, check badge readers near the press gallery. They moved in methodical steps. The forensics began to point inward. Sam found metadata in the file trail that indicated the photograph was uploaded from a terminal that had been assigned to Evelyn's assistant earlier that day. The assistant had been moving through the building, delivering notes and carrying coffee. A new emotion threaded through the team. Incredulity. Victor watched faces shift from anger to disbelief as names on a list acquired edges. Evelyn's presence in the temporary boardroom turned confrontational. She demanded urgency and compliance. Victor refused her call for an immediate sweeping apology. She responded with a quieter, more dangerous pressure. A threat to call a special shareholder session. The threat forced a decision. Victor could not allow the board to preempt the investigation. He also could not openly defy them without risking the integration. He chose a narrower path, confront the assistant, and secure the terminal logs before the board could convene. Claire joined him in that decision. If this comes from Evelyn's aid, then the room is poisoned from the top. I want to hand the company to that kind of politics. They went to confront Evelyn's assistant. The exchange was direct and contained rapid dialogue that snapped like a wire. Rachel, where were you at 20:04? Victor, Rachel, did you print or send that photograph? Claire demanded. Rachel, did you enter the press gallery? Amir. Rachel stammered. I'm here all day. Delivered a note to the gallery at 9. I would never. Victor interrupted. Rachel, your badge shows you near the third-floor terminal at 20:04. Explain that. Rachel's face drained. I was fetching a charger for Evelyn. I don't know about any photo. The exchange ended without a clean confession. But Sam, checking network logs on his tablet, spoke up. This upload was routed through a VPN tied to an off-site freelance account. The local terminal was used as a relay. Someone used Rachel's access without her knowledge. That revelation tightened the plot. Someone had weaponized access while keeping a clean badge in play. Victor felt suspicion turn into a focused resolve. The attacker wanted to point fingers at Claire and Victor, but they had created a breadcrumb trail that led inward. The confrontation in the glass came later that night. Claire, he needed her alone in the negotiation room. He closed the door and left the lights low so rim lights sculpted their profiles. The pendant and the cufflink lay between them like evidence and accusation. The conversation that followed became the chapter's peak. Why would someone do this to us? Victor began to you. To me, Claire's voice was quiet but hard, because we stand in the way of someone who profits from chaos. Because some people prefer to keep their power by breaking others. Victor's suspicion grew sharper. He pressed, who exactly benefits from you being discredited? Claire named a person quietly. Evelyn's rival on the board, Lucian Harrow. He loses the integration if we survive. He has been buying small stakes covertly. He wanted control of procurement. Victor's reaction was sudden. Lucian. He sat across from us during the signing. He had the tone of a man who designs fate for others. Claire's tone changed then, from guarded to accusing. Lucian authorized a vendor change that cost Jules' team their budget last quarter. He subtle questions about who would yield under pressure. He has motive, they argued in quick lines, 3 to 6 exchanges that built like a rapid-fire negotiation. Victor, this doesn't prove Lucian. Claire. It moves him up the list. Victor answered. Amir, can you tie Lucian's accounts to any of the routing? Victor, I'm on it. Amir replied. I'll need a court order for his private rota logs. The confrontation reached a narrow confession of strategy rather than admission of guilt. Claire, if this is Lucian, he used someone with access. He hid behind his assistants. He made a photograph narrative and then hoped we deflinch. He wanted the deal to breathe wrong. Victor stood. He paced once, hands steepled as he decided. He felt a sudden shift from outrage to calculated patience. We'll expose the path. We will not let this pivot be the lever Lucian uses. We'll follow the routing. We'll keep the statement tight. We'll not give the press fodder. The room carried a brittle silence after that. Claire packed a small box of the few personal items she kept at the office. A silk scarf, a slim leather notebook, the pendant tucked carefully into its corner. She moved with a quiet economy that showed acceptance rather than resignation. Dawn began to lighten the skyline. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city shifted from navy to paler blue. Inside, the tension eased into exhausted decisions. Amir and Sam presented a preliminary forensic trail that pointed at a pattern of internal misdirection. Their conclusion did not indict a single person, but narrowed the field to a handful of leadership, who stood to gain if Claire's firm was compromised. Claire zipped the box closed and slid it into her bag without fanfare. Before she left, she placed the pendant into the box and then, after a pause, slid the cufflink into the same corner. The act was specific and decisive. She would not leave someone else's token on a table to be a lever for rumor. Victor watched from the glass wall as she walked away. He did not call after her. He did not move until the elevator doors closed and swallowed her reflection. Then he tapped his fingers twice against the glass and turned back to the room that still held evidence and technical screens. He felt an unease that did not resolve into certainty, but he had a chain of next steps. He had an investigation with names, logs, and a tightened staff. They had resolved the immediate mini-conflict. The items were planted, and the trail pointed inward. The larger contest continued. Victor left the negotiation room with the pendant in an evidence envelope and a decision to pursue subpoenas. Claire left with her box and the pendant inside. The morning delivered no applause. It delivered one concrete movement. A photograph that changed suspicion into a course of action, a board member named as a suspect, and a closed elevator door. Claire's departure was the chapter's endpoint and its promise. She did not shout or make vows. She closed the elevator and the doors clicked. Victor watched until the doors consumed her silhouette. He released his fingers from the glass and folded the evidence envelope into his briefcase. He replaced his cufflinks. He did not know the final outcome yet, but he had chosen the next set of moves. The investigation would follow the facts, not rumors. The negotiation room, emptied of bodies but full of questions, remained quiet except for the soft hum of servers and the faint, steady tapping of Marta's keyboard as she drafted a factual, limited statement for internal distribution. The pendant and cufflink sat in chain of custody. The morning held a new rhythm. Forensics, subpoenas, board arguments, and a line to follow. That was how Victor would answer suspicion. And when the doors on the elevator closed around Claire, he understood the chapter's cost in precise, physical terms. A personal small box in a woman's hands and a company's integrity subject to someone else's gambit. The external fight had been contained for now. The internal war for truth and control would continue. He left the negotiation room with steps that matched his decisions and a list of names that would not be dismissed. The final concrete beat came when Marta cleared her throat and handed him the printed copy of the photograph with a small note pinned to the corner. Preserve evidence. No leaks. Victor nodded and slid the paper into his pocket before he walked toward the temporary boardroom for the next confrontation. Claire stepped into the elevator, the doors closed, and Victor released his fingers from the glass. Claire pushed open the office door and found a sealed corporate transfer notice sitting on her desk that removed her founder protections. Betrayal slid into her hands as she turned the paper over and read the bold clause flagging mass roll eliminations. The office lights were off. Her footsteps echoed on the linoleum as she held the sheet, and the box she had carried out earlier that night rested on a kitchen stool. Within the first minute she knew the fight had shifted from the boardroom to the practical work of keeping people paid and projects intact. She closed the door behind her and folded the notice flat. Her fingers brushed the thin gold pendant at her throat the way she always did when she wanted the noise inside her head to quiet. The pendant had been on the table at the signing. She had seen Victor's cufflink beside it in the negotiation folder. The pendant and the cufflink had felt like a private language in that glass room. Now the same objects had become evidence of leverage and of loss. Claire moved down the corridor to the kitchen with the notice folded in her palm. She did not sit. Standing made it easier to breathe and to be ready. Elena was waiting by the espresso machine, arms crossed, eyes red from a recent call. Claire, Elena, they posted the memo. People are seeing headlines. Show me, Claire replied. Elena shoved her phone forward. Names and a timeline scrolled under a bland headline. Employees would lose roles at first light unless terms were renegotiated. Claire read one sentence aloud, steady in voice. Founders' protections removed effective immediately. Betrayal started as heat behind Claire's ribs and became a decision forming in the muscles of her throat. Emotion shifted from disbelief to resolve. She folded the notice into her notebook and closed it with deliberate pressure. Elena, we do this smart. We do this together. Outside the kitchen door, a junior engineer wandered in. Face pale. Claire, what does this mean for severance? She asked. Elena will answer that. Claire, I will get you details by noon. Her voice held an edge. She had to show steady movement for people who had no leverage left. The staff conversation opened the first burst of external pressure. Employees clustered around the counter, murmuring. Claire listened to specifics, project leads named, tentative termination dates, a mention of a quiet settlement. People tapped at phones and exchanged frightened looks. We meet at 9. I won't sign anything I haven't approved. The sentence landed like a thin shield. It did not remove fear, but it provided direction. After the staff left with shaky nods, Claire walked the empty floor. Her hand found the notebook strap. She thought of the cardboard box she had carried out earlier, the mug with a logo, a stack of paper clips, a printed photo of a team lunch. She let the memories be concrete. Who had sat at that table, who had joked about deadlines. She did not use generalities. She went back to her desk and opened the company spreadsheet to verify payroll numbers. At 11, Marcus Reed called. Claire, we need to talk about optics. Marcus, without preamble. Marcus, tell me plainly. Claire replied, there was a tip. Someone linked the pendant to an off, the record push from your legal team, and Julian says PRA will run if it gets traction. Marcus' voice was low and fast. Practiced for emergencies. Claire folded her fingers on the desk and listened. Doubt flared, had someone on her side hidden clauses. She, who gave the tip, can't say yet. But if that pendant appears in a leaked document, people will think you negotiated away protections. Marcus paused. We can handle this. But we need clarity on the transfer language. Claire felt the emotion shift again. Resolve slid toward suspicion. She set a meeting for as soon as Marcus and Julian could assemble counsel. She did not yet accuse anyone. She assembled facts. The glass-walled conference room had the smell of new marker and cleaned glass. Claire walked in with Alina and 2 team leads and faced Victor and his counsel across the table. The light from the city fell in thin strips across the polished surface. Victor looked the same, suit flawless, gold tie bar catching the light. His presence was reserved and measured. Claire kept her hands visible on the table. Victor. Claire began. The transfer notice removes founder protections. Explain. Her voice was plain. Victor steepled his fingers and blinked once before he answered. The language was approved by your counsel in the red line process. His voice was deep and controlled. That's not what Alina's checks show. Alina, there are timestamp drafts that omit the clause you just circulated. Julian slid a printed timeline across the table. We have a version dated earlier that contains founders' protections. The later distribution lacks it. Julian's tone was clipped. Victor's jaw tightened. Legal finalized the language based on fiduciary advice. Our priority was certainty for shareholders. Priority for shareholders doesn't pay salaries at midnight. Claire, it doesn't tell people where their rent will come from. She kept her sentences short and factual. The room shifted away from abstract motives and back to the real stakes: pay, health coverage, dependents. Marcus interjected, there is a risk of optics. If the pendant is framed as a prop or planted evidence, the narrative turns violent. Then show me the evidence. Claire. The conversation accelerated into a string of pointed exchanges. Alina pressed on severance numbers, Julian on legal intent, Victor on fiduciary duty. At one point the discussion became a rapid back and forth. Victor, why was that clause removed? Claire demanded, because it undermined integration. Victor replied, who approved that removal? Claire, my legal team. Victor, name them. Claire, you have counsel on your side who saw drafts. Victor returned, we will pull email trails. Alina, do it now. Claire ordered. The back and forth lasted less than 3 minutes but landed like an impact. It left the room electric and unresolved. Claire left the glass room with a list of documents and a new suspicion. Someone had withheld a protection clause, and that withholding shifted power. When Sophia slipped into the foyer 10 minutes later, she was winded and her cheeks were flushed. She held a tablet in both hands the way someone holds contraband. Claire, she said, I have the timestamp draft. Claire looked at the device. Show me. Sophia set the tablet on the table and opened an email thread. Timestamps, version names, and inline edits scrolled across the screen. The date and author lines were clear. A draft had included founders' protections and a later distribution omitted them. This was saved to a shared drive 2 hours before the final distribution. Sophia. Someone removed it. Claire read the lines. The concrete detail unspooled, file names, upload times, and user IDs. She felt a sharp shift from suspicion to clarity. She, give this to Alina and Julian now. Print 3 copies. The action was simple. The consequence was immediate. The arrival of hard evidence became the chapter's mid-point mini cliffhanger. For a moment, the office held its breath as the scale of the revelation sank in. The team moved faster. Phones came alive. Marcus and Julian stepped into a corner to discuss damage control. Victor's expression rotated from contained to thinly tight. He left the room without a word. Claire did not follow. She stayed with Sophia and Elena and watched their faces contain the same mix of fear and calculation. People in the company needed reassurance and a plan. Claire tasked nodes of action. Payroll verification, a public statement draft, and a confidential legal review of the draft versions. She assigned names and deadlines. Her leadership was concrete directions and tried choices. At dawn, the confrontation spilled into the public atrium. Employees gathered on the steps, and a small cluster of reporters waited behind a velvet rope. Claire stepped into the open and faced Victor with Alina by her side. The sky outside the glass was thin and pale. It did not soften the fact of what was happening. "Victor," Claire allowed so everyone could hear, "why did your team remove that clause?" Victor met her eyes. He did not look away. It was a legal decision made to ensure a clean integration. "I believed it was necessary for the business." His tone was controlled. "You believed it was necessary to remove their protections without telling them," Elena demanded. Marcus moved forward. "If we make this public without full context, Claire..." He stopped when Claire shot him a look. "No, Marcus. The context is the timeline. The timeline shows a version with protections. The later version does not. We will not let people be pushed out without compensation." Claire's words were measured and precise. She named the outcome she wanted. Severance retained projects, transparency. Then Sophia stepped forward. "Claire, look at this." She handed Claire a printed email with a header showing a legal user seed and an internal note, "Execute as distributed. Delay further approvals." The note suggested deliberate movement to lock the document. This was sent hours before the public distribution. "Sophia." Claire read the line. The new detail changed the scene. It suggested active engineering of the transfer, not clerical error. That revelation sharpened the confrontation. Victor's face went colder. "Victor, did you know about this instruction?" "Claire." Victor did not answer immediately. He listened to the murmur of the crowd. Then he said, "There was counsel advising that certain protections would complicate integration timelines. The priority given was minimizing risk to the combined entity." "Who wrote the instruction?" Elena pressed. Victor's jaw worked. "It came from counsel on my side." "Name them." Claire demanded again. There was a pause while cameras clicked. Victor looked at Marcus before he spoke. "I want to expose counsel in this room." His tone was terse. The crowd's impatience rose. Someone shouted a question about severance. Claire answered it with specifics. A temporary hold on any terminations until a full review, immediate release of severance timelines, and a promise to negotiate retention for critical projects. She did not promise everything. She promised action and accountability. The argument reached its peak when Claire accused Victor outright. "You chose legacy over people," she said. Victor's reply was quieter than expected. "I made a decision I thought would preserve the company. If that looks callous, then I accept responsibility for how it reads." Claire felt the energy pivot. She had expected him to deny or deflect. Instead, he offered a thin admission, but it was not the confession she wanted. She stepped forward and put the printed evidence on the podium where reporters could see it. "There is a paper trail," she said. "We will make sure people get their due." The confrontation broke into smaller arguments and practical planning. Legal teams moved to separate rooms. Julian and Marcus argued about what to release publicly. Elena coordinated payroll checks. Sophia continued to pull more files, and each new document tightened the net around the earlier distributions. After the atrium scene, Claire needed to know whether Victor would shift policy or double down. She did not have to guess for long. That afternoon she received a call from Marcus who sounded brittle but precise. "Claire." He's ordered a reversal of immediate layoffs and instructed finance to draft a severance plan. Marcus' words were quick and factual. Claire let out a breath she had been holding. "Marcus, who initiated that?" she asked. "Victor. Me on the rooftop. He did not want this to go public as a bloodletting. He knows the optics are worse than the hit to margins." He directed a pause and a compensation plan. Marcus' voice gave nothing away about motive. Claire filed that information the way she had filed other details that day. As useful fact. The reversal did not erase what had happened. It did not absolve anyone of responsibility. It did, however, change the stakes and allowed a new negotiation. That evening, Claire gathered the remaining staff in the emptied kitchen under weak morning light that tipped the countertops amber. The room had the smell of cold coffee and cleaning solution. She placed the thin gold pendant on the table between her and Elena like an object that needed translation. This is what was on the table when decisions were made. Claire, it belongs to me. It should not be used as evidence in a smear. We are going to protect what matters. The work, the people, and the dignity of how we leave and how we stay. Elena listened and then read a short statement. We will accept a negotiated settlement that protects severance. We will retain projects critical to ongoing teams. And we will publish a clear timeline for any integrations that affect headcount. Her voice was steady. A hand went up. What about the people already told they are out? A product manager asked. We will prioritize them for severance faster than the legal process dictates. Claire, and we will offer transitional support for at least 90 days. She kept her promises concrete, days, dollars, and specific next steps. She refused grand rhetoric and kept the focus on measurable outcomes. Sophia brought forward an additional surprise, a set of internal messages that named a partner at Victor's firm who had pushed the immediate distribution. The name changed how Claire saw the earlier timing. It suggested someone had accelerated the rollout for reasons tied to a personal stake. That discovery introduced a new twist and widened the list of people whose choices mattered. Over the next 24 hours, meetings multiplied. Claire and her team worked with Julian to draft a public timeline and with her to prepare severance packages. Marcus coordinated with Victor's finance team until the numbers squared. The action was mostly procedural now. It was a different kind of fight, documented, accountable, exact. Claire spent a late night at her desk, the pendant warm against her blouse when she touched it. She wrote a short internal memo that laid out the sequence of events, the evidence they had, and the commitments Victor's team had made. The memo included a request for an independent audit of the decision chain. She did not speculate in the memo. She attached timestamps, file names, and Sophifius copies. The tone was plain and unornamented. When she sent the memo, Elena came into the office with a box of paperwork and 2 cups of coffee. You did the right thing, Elena. We did it together. Claire replied. They drank the coffee in 3 small sips. The final confrontation that morning in the atrium had resolved the immediate mini-conflict. Layoffs paused and a plan for severance existed. The larger moral question, who engineered the omission and why, remained. Claire had to accept that unraveling motive would take time, and that the company would continue under combined leadership with fragile trust. A week later, the team gathered again in the kitchen. The room was quieter now. The people who had been most at risk had received their checks and transitional support. The projects deemed critical retained their core teams. Claire placed the pendant in the center of the table and did not pick it up. I want to wear it for a while, she said, but I won't let it become a weapon against our people either. She looked at Elena, Sophia, and the remaining team leads. Elena nodded. We move forward with transparency. Sophia cleared her throat, and we'll keep pulling traces. If that partner at Victor's firm was involved, we will document it. Claire felt the last shift of the chapter's emotions. From betrayal to organized action, from doubt to measured trust in her team. She had expected heroic speeches would change nothing. Instead, small actions, emails, printed timestamps, and early payroll release had protected lives. Victor sent a brief email to Claire and Julian the next morning acknowledging he had ordered the pause and promising cooperation on the audit. His words were few and formal. Claire read them and made a note to request a public statement about the severance plan. She did not allow herself to pass motive in public. She allowed the facts to stand for now. When the final meeting concluded, Claire gathered the remaining staff in the kitchen one last time. She placed the thin gold pendant on the table and let her hand rest near it, but not on it. We are not the same company we were 2 weeks ago, she said. We will be smaller in places, but we will keep the work that defines us. We will honor those who are leaving and support those who remain. She listed the concrete steps. Severance amounts, a 90-day transition team, and a retained staff fund for essential projects. Elena read the final implementation dates aloud. Sophia confirmed the audit request had been filed and provided a reference number. Marcus confirmed that Victor's team had released the reversal order to finance. The people at the table heard names, dates, and sums. They left with envelopes that contained the first checks or instructions about next steps. Claire did not make promises about future reconciliations. She could not speak for the board or for Victor's motives. She could, however, place what she could protect on the table and act on it. She reached across and set the thin gold pendant on the table for a second time, not as a claim to possession, but as a marker of what had been at stake. Elena stood and gathered the empty mugs. "Ready?" she asked. Claire nodded. Ready, they walked out of the kitchen together. The pendant remained on the table. The door closed behind them on the room where the team had argued, planned, and chosen a path that preserved people over a narrow notion of legacy. The chapter ended on a practical note. Claire left a signed instruction with her to expedite severance payouts and a formal request to the legal team to pursue the audit that Sofia had begun. Her last act before she stepped into daylight was to send a short message to Marcus. "Thank you. Hold their names at the forefront." Marcus replied with 2 words. "Always, Claire," the conversation tied to actions and decisions rather than rhetoric. That was the point she wanted to leave the team with. The pendant sat on the table, an object that had helped reveal a choice, and that now marked a promise to protect those choices with paperwork and numbers. The chapter closed on the concrete beat of a signed her instruction and an outgoing message confirming severance release times. The final sound beyond the kitchen door was the elevator closing and the city beginning its day outside the glass.